My name is Joanne and I'm a part of the Business Springboard that I run along with Nigel. It's lovely to see some familiar faces on the attendee list. Welcome back to those of you who listened to me talk before, and welcome to new people on there too. It's a pleasure to have you on board, and hopefully you will enjoy this afternoon's webinar, which incidentally is one of my favourites because I am a bit of a Christmas bod and I do love the festive season from a personal point of view. From an HR point of view, when I put that hat on, it does quite scare me in some cases, which I'm going to come on to. But you know, above all, I do love the Christmas time, and delivering this webinar does actually make me feel quite Christmassy, even though we're mid-November. So just to tell you a little bit about Nigel, my colleague at the Business Springboard, he's a fully qualified chartered accountant. He has an awful lot of people management and operational experience, and we together run the Business Springboard. We both are practitioners as well as trainers, which I think gives us quite a bit of uniqueness in the training field. And Nigel focuses on a lot of the financial areas and operational areas, including managing towards targets and managing operations, as well as finance and non-finance managers. And you can see some of the courses that Nigel delivers over there. I'm now going to pass you over to Nigel, who'll tell you a bit more about me.
Hello there, and a very warm welcome from me as well. As you can hear, Liz is chuckling in the background because she's not seen us do our double act goodbye from him, goodbye from me type presentation. I would like to warmly welcome my colleague Joanne Vose. Joanne is a practicing HR practitioner, so she deals with the practice, the law, and is also highly qualified to deliver our leadership training packages. And that can be anything from a bit of appraisal training or interview training right the way up to a complete management development program. And that's certainly the bit that she enjoys doing, and I'm sure that you're going to very much enjoy listening to her talk about Christmas, because I've been listening to it for about 4 weeks now. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping. As always, those of you that I know will be saying, oh no, he's put this slide on again, but it is important that what we're trying to do today is raise your awareness towards things, and certainly on some of the bits I'm going to cover. There are a couple of sort of PAYE type things just to remind you of, and there are also a couple of Bribery Act type things which I'm going to remind you of. Clearly, within the space of 40 minutes, I can't give you any consultancy on that, so if you go away and do something with it, then you can't come back and say the Business Springboard told us to do it. So I just remind you that this is an awareness raising program as opposed to a specifically tailored advice session. So, okay, what are we going to cover before I hand over to Joanne? Well, there was a takeoff of a lovely song from the 70s saying, didn't we have a lovely time at the office Christmas party? Well, Joanne's going to talk about having a lovely time, but also some of the things that can go wrong and your responsibilities as employers. Leading on nicely from that, and you're going to say bar humbug at this stage, I'm going to talk tax and the Christmas party, but there are some useful things that you can do to save that. Then we move on to the thing that we know is going to hit us, because it always does, is you're going to get flu, you're probably going to get norovirus chasing around the office. So Joanne's going to talk about how to manage that and how to deal with it. And similarly, if you believe what you've been seeing in the papers, there is an Arctic airstream about to hit us in 2 or 3 weeks' time, which is going to cover us in snow for Christmas. That's one theory, but it's very mild and wet at the moment. Joanne will talk to you how to manage through bad weather. And then I'm going to talk about the Bribery Act, which is perhaps something we should do a full webinar on at some point, because there's tons of it, and I just don't have time to go through all of it. But again, just to heighten your awareness to the things you need to be thinking of as we come to the hospitality season. As Liz has said, questions and answers can be at any time. We're more than happy to look at things that come through our way, and we will ask you some questions because we want to get to know you too. Okay, I'm handing over to Joanne and the office Christmas party.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, Liz has just made a point that we should have some jingle bells in the background as we move on to this. So quick poll of you all, if you could use the chat box and just tell me who is having a Christmas party, if you just want to let me know yes on that. Some coming through, some yeses. And you know, it quite pleases me because I think from an HR point of view, and there's a lot of HR professionals on the webinar today, as I said, I love a Christmas party, but from an HR point of view, it did go a bit, and I think we're hopefully coming out of that over consciousness of having that party and the issues it can bring. Oh, a no there. That's interesting as well. For those of you that replied yes, will you be having a free bar? If anybody would just want to write free in there, if you're having a free bar, there's some yeses, which I presume reply to that. Oh yeah, some frees. Okay, so interesting stuff. So Christmas parties. They're a great time to get your employees together, say thank you at the end of the year, have some fun outside the office, good for team building, good for morale, and we want to keep it that way. And that's what my focus is keeping it that way. And let's get the most from these office Christmas parties. Um, I have unfortunately been on the other side and I've dismissed people after Christmas parties, which is never a pleasant thing to do and not something that none of us, we don't want to be in that position. So we need to think quite carefully about the office for Christmas party and our obligations as employers. So yeah, it is all good fun, but what about when it goes bad, and what can we do to preempt this and make sure things don't go wrong? The reason why I asked about the free bar is, unfortunately, you look around at a lot of the articles on this, alcohol plays a big part. And I am, when my clients ask me about Christmas parties, one of the first words out of my lips usually, don't have a free bar. Um, I am all for a few free drinks vouchers, and I think that can work very well. But remember, we've got a duty of care as an employer. Now, it is, and sometimes contrary to popular belief, the employer is liable for other people's actions, even at a Christmas party, even if it's held outside of normal working hours and at a different venue. We have a duty of care still to provide a safe working environment. It's a work event. It's organised by us. Even if it's not financially contributed by us, we still have a duty of care to provide that environment. So we need to be quite careful there. And with that in mind, we have to think about, is it work and is it not? Well, it would be viewed at being at work. So there's a lot of pieces of legislation that still stand during that time. Things like your harassment and bullying policy, et cetera, will all be in play during that time. So you need to bear that in mind. Now, where I have seen it go wrong will be, whether it's drink and alcohol related or not, that we can step outside those normal boundaries that we would have within an office environment. And that's when we cause our problems. So perhaps there's something in there about defining those boundaries and having something in place. Now, I'm a realist. Anybody who's listened to my HR webinars before will know that it's about applying this to the organisation, making sure we do it so fairly, but let's have a bit of degree of common sense in there as well. Now, I've put having a party policy on there. I'm not by any means saying that you have to write a separate whole big party policy of how to behave at the office Christmas party, but perhaps have some reference in there in your handbook, if you do have one, or any sort of policies about how it's going to be, that there is a general acceptance that people know that this is a work event and there are some standards that you would be expected to adhere to. So have a think about that, and one of the biggest things can be harassment. The one incident that I cited earlier about dismissing somebody was where there was a fight at a Christmas party, and I ended up having to dismiss somebody after that. It was a quite extreme circumstances. There was a relationship involved, etc. But it came down to harassment, and people need to be aware that those principles still come into play at the office Christmas party. Now, whether you believe that alcohol may fuel this, may be something you've got to know your staff as well and look to limit it. If it's a free bar, is there a cap? Is there a limit? Is there some easy you can manage that with drinks vouchers? So everybody, for example, gets a couple of drinks vouchers. Do you just put wine on the tables? Whatever you choose to do. In that theme as well, think about on the religious discrimination, and that not just religious discrimination, but any sort of discrimination. You don't want people to feel obliged to drink alcohol, obliged to turn up, obliged to be uncomfortable, celebrate something that they perhaps wouldn't normally celebrate within their particular beliefs. So we've got quite a bit of a minefield there to consider. Again, you need to give some consideration, but remember what your sole aim is. I am all for a good get-together and the good team building and the things they can bring, but we need to think this through. So let's think firstly on the discrimination. Just be aware that everybody is individual, and that there are different religions and cultures, and think about the discrimination in there. There's no harm whatsoever in celebrating Christmas, because we can do that, and it's fine to have a Christmas party, but just be aware that not everybody might want to join in and have that celebration, and that will be completely fine. Um, Also bear that in mind within the office, not just at the Christmas party, about the types of decorations or things that go on in there. It's not saying that everybody has to engage within this, and not to take any action if people chose not to engage in it. The drug and alcohol issue, as I've talked on the alcohol there, drugs come into play as well, and I don't want to talk about just at the office party. Think about when you're having that. If you're a company that works 7 days a week, or even if it was 5 days a week and you had it on a weeknight, will people be coming to work the following day? And if so, how are they going to get there? And if they're going to drive, can you be assured that they will do so safely? It's little bits of this that we do need to think of that will lead you into having a very safe and hopefully enjoyable Christmas party. Um, One thing I will also say about the Christmas party on the drugs and alcohol, think of your brand. I have also had some organisations that have come to me adamant they're not having a Christmas party because the year before their employees, with no boundaries in place, acted completely out of order. The company got banned from the hotel. That is not good for their brand and image. People talk, organisations talk, and you need to think about that. What do you want to project to the outside world? You know, we all look for a good time, but if your brand and your image is very conservative and straight down the line of the law, and whatever that may be, if you're having all of that brand that you project, and then it's local knowledge perhaps of where you are, that you go and have a good old knees up and there's people perhaps slightly intoxicated doing whatever knows what in the car park, you need to think that through for your brand and image. So be careful, make sure that they do align. Um, one very key thing I've got there about making promises. Again, I will say that alcohol does come into it, but not just alcohol. You're out of the work environment, everyone's a bit more relaxed, the issue of work comes up, the boss says to somebody in the office team, oh, don't worry, yeah, we'll sort a promotion out for you. Next year you're going to be in this role. That is a promise that your management is making, and there is some case law around that, where somebody made a promise, a manager at an office party, for a pay rise. The pay rise didn't happen. The person left and claimed constructive dismissal. So we need to be thinking about these. And my view is of the Christmas party, and being from an HR profession, when I'm at a Christmas party, unfortunately, most of the time I am at work. So it doesn't mean I can't enjoy myself, but all your management team are still there in a management capacity. I have a belief, this is my personal belief in there, that they should be, again, still having a good time and relaxing looking at the team, but I wouldn't hope to see the management team perhaps losing control of the situation and allowing things to happen that we wouldn't normally allow to happen. So it is an extension of the work environment, so just be careful on that. The getting home issue from the Christmas party, again, case law around this about should we or shouldn't we offer transport. But remember, going back to this duty of care, if you know that one of your employees is intoxicated with alcohol, and they leave the building to get into their car, where does the duty of care stop? And if they got in the car and had an accident, where does the duty of care come into that? Now, we need to think morally and also legally on this about our duty of care. So is there some provisions that you're going to put in about getting home? Where does your duty of care stop? If you have an earlier Christmas party that ends at 7 o'clock and then everybody chooses to go their own way, but a group of people go out afterwards, is that where your duty of care stops at that time? So I think we've got to do some planning before as employers, and we have to put that into practice. Again, we want to have a good time and we want to get those benefits, but let's do so safely. Um, Finishing off on the Christmas party is what do you do the next day? Again, we live in a 24/7 environment, and so we haven't, often organisations aren't in a position where they'll have their Christmas party on a Friday night and nobody has to go to work on the Saturday. What are you going to do the following day if people call in sick? What are you going to do if they're too embarrassed to come to work because of an incident that's happened, or they feel threatened to come to work the following day? So we need to be planning our capacity the following day and looking at how we're going to deal with that. So I hope that's given you some pointers to think about, and that's what it is. There's so much in there that you need to think through to make sure you have a successful Christmas party, and something you're really going to take on board. So on that point, hopefully Nigel will be able to move on to the next slide without thinking about how he's going to manage me at our office party.
Thanks, Joanne. I would add, though, that she had one glass of mulled wine only at our Christmas party last year, but I believe the Christmas pudding was quite alcoholic. But therein lies another story, because she's partial to Christmas pudding. Which brings me on very nicely to Christmas and the taxman, and whether we need to be happy or afraid or somewhere in between of this. I'm sure most of you know who are probably providing the free bars and the free nights out, as many of you have said, that you can take some allowance for PAYE purposes for the Christmas party. So it can be allowable. I haven't said it is allowable because you need to meet one or two conditions, which I'm going to just highlight to you, just to remind you that you have got that taped when you come to make your claim for your own Christmas party. And there are certain instances where it may not be allowable. So what you've got to do is you've got to think that if you're having this party, as Joanna said, everybody's got to be invited. So forget about people's religion, their beliefs or whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is there is an event that is being sponsored by your company and everybody has got to be invited. Now, okay, what if I'm Sainsbury's and I've got 10 million stores sat across the UK? Well, it could be at a specific, you could make it site specific, or you could even make it department specific. But what I would always do is make sure that you've either got the little notice or the email or the intranet advert saying Christmas party for these people and that everybody's invited. Next decision that you need to make is, are you inviting partners as well? If you're inviting partners, it's all employees and all partners. So just keep it simple, keep it consistent, keep a little bit of a record of it as well, because that's always handy. The next bit, which you probably know, but I'm just going to delve into it a little bit, is that you've got £150 per head for the event or events. Now, that £150 is basically throughout the tax year, and unfortunately, is misconceived as a bit like a tax or a national insurance threshold, in that you can pay the 150 and then the rest becomes a P11D item or part of your PAYE settlement agreement. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work like that. It is an all or nothing allowance. So you spend £149.99 per head, you're in the clear, forget about it, there's no reporting. You spend £150 and a penny, then it's P11D or settlement agreement time. So you need to be very careful how you monitor this. So some of you have said that you're providing food. Some of you have said that you're providing drinks. That needs to go into it. Joanna's talked about transport as well. That needs to go into the equation. However, if you find that you've got some transport that maybe costs 20 quid, the meals maybe 30, and you've got a tenner for drinks, that's still only 60. Good news is you can use some of it for the rest of the tax year as well. So that's when I mentioned event or events. So I've got clients in my accountancy practice that do something small 3 times a year and then spend most of it at Christmas. And as long as it goes under that, that's absolutely cool. The minute it goes over, then we're into benefit territory. So, good news also is that staff entertaining does get the VAT back, which a lot of clients are always a bit afraid to do because they think they can't do it. It's absolutely fine. But the family element doesn't get us to get the VAT back unless a charge is made. So if you say charged a tenner for a ticket, but it was a subsidised ticket, you probably get away with recovering all of the VAT on the party. And even better, a modest gift is allowable. Now, you're going to laugh at this because this is actually an extract from the legislation. And it just tells you how time has changed in that two pretty common Christmas items have changed in their perception of value and price. The revenue give the example of you can give your members of staff a turkey or an ordinary bottle of wine. Now, I don't know whether any of you have been into the supermarket or tried to do your online order lately, but the last time I looked, an ordinary bottle of wine and a turkey were not the same cost. The turkeys I was looking at, I was absolutely passed out. Some of them are about 50 or 60 quid, and that's not a 3-bird roast from Waitrose or anything like that. But yet your wine, you're probably looking at sort of 7, 8, 9 pounds for a decent something that's quite drinkable. Yet you could get a bottle of Bollinger for less than the price of a turkey. You got the bottle of Bollinger, you'd probably get challenged on it, but with a turkey you probably wouldn't. So I suppose there's only one word to describe that, which is stuffing. Right, on that note, bringing stuffing to witness winter sickness, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Joanne.
Thanks, Nigel. Nigel obviously wasn't using me as example of ordinary wine. He doesn't know how expensive my taste is. Okay, so moving on to your winter sickness. Now, you do find that looking around at organisations that sickness levels tend to increase in the winter months. Now, the reasons we can look to that could be genuine sickness absence. We have lots of flus and colds and tummy bugs and what have you else that goes on during the winter. Also, people tend to have less holidays in the winter than in the summer. Generally, I'm speaking here. So that could play a part in it too. But is there another element too? In the winter, I'm more inclined to have these duvet day or other sickies that I've played. Though it might be non-genuine sickness absences, but it's cold and dark and I don't really want to get out of bed and it's nice and warm and cosy in here, so I might have a day off. Or Christmas is coming and I haven't done my Christmas shopping and I might just take the odd day to go and do it. So we need to be aware that sickness levels often do increase in the winter months, and we need to look at how we're going to manage these. And this should be very fairly and consistently as per your normal policy. And sickness absence is a bit of an area that I have specialised in the past. I find it very interesting that we can do so much to manage it. It's quite simple. Often lots of organisations don't do, but it is definitely something that has a massive cost to companies, and we need to be managing it. So look at your policy, have a good policy in place, make sure it's implemented, do what you say you're going to do, make sure your managers are trained on how to implement attendance management policies. That's an absolute key to it. Make sure that the policy covers both support and outlines consequences of absence. Is there going to be a difference between short-term and long-term? I usually differentiate between the two. Short-term is anything under 3 weeks, long-term is anything over. And they may be looked at in a slightly different way. Absolutely essential, and I'm always, you would be surprised how many organisations do not record and accurately monitor attendance. Let's have some records, let's look over it. Even if you do input into the night system, how often do you quite look back and see it? It's always good to reflect back on a calendar type. Are there any patterns, Friday, Mondays, certain days of the week that anybody might be falling into absence that we may have to have a look at? Things you may want to look at as a company to reduce, private healthcare has got a massive cost. It's also a benefit, but we don't need to take it as far as that. But what we're trying to do here is to ensure people are fit and healthy to be at work. So something like immunisations can be a really good route for an organisation to take to protect their company, which can be seen as a benefit to the employees, but also actually helps to reduce sickness absence. The other things that we could look in there are flexible working. Are there any working from home measures that we can put in place to perhaps avoid some of these non-genuine absences, etc. And Nigel has asked me to remind you that actually the cost of the flu jab to give your employees is not seen as a benefit from HRMC, so it wouldn't be on your P11Ds in there as well. And, for the price of a flu jab, which is under £10 often, if you immunise your staff and that's going to reduce your absenteeism, that could be a good investment to make. And moving on to bad weather, so yeah, there's all sorts in the press at the moment. I think we had a very mild year last year. I don't even think we had any snow, but before that we had a couple of really bad winters, which obviously are going to have an effect on how people get to work. So it's something we have got to consider and do some forward planning on. What are we going to do if an employee is late or doesn't attend the office in bad weather? Are we going to put that as holiday, offered holiday? Are we going to say it's unpaid leave? They're going to call in sick because they feel no other options, and then we're going to have a skewed and non-true absence reporting? Are we going to let people work from home, work flexible hours? These are all the options that you have got. At the end of the day, you need to be fair and consistent. There's no statutory right for people to have time off because it snows. There is some protected and degrees of fairness if people genuinely can't get in. Of course, what they do have protected rights about is domestic leave, because often in periods of bad weather, schools close. If the school's closed and the children are at home, somebody needs to look after the parents. We cannot take any action for domestic leave, but we can start to look at how we may look to work flexibly with us, as they use holidays, have some flexible working to help people through this time. I'm a working parent myself, and the school closing is it fills me full of dread, because I've got to get to work. So it's not a stress-free situation for any parent, and we need to do what we can to get the best for everybody. Look at your culture. How's that reflected? Are you the type of the organisation that would encourage that, or do you have a very autocratic culture where it'll be black and white and people are told what to do? You also need to think about when it would be fair to discipline when people don't come into. What are you actually looking to achieve this? Because you've got to put yourself sometimes in the employee's shoes, and if you're desperate to come to work, and 2 years ago where I live, the road was literally closed because of snow drifts, so I couldn't get out of the village. If I was an employee desperate to get to work and I physically couldn't, and you disciplined me, remember, employment's a two-way thing. We've got to think of this relationship. So let's look at some other options to get the best from staff. Also bearing in mind that this could be something that is abused, so just be careful in there too. Okay, and finally, passing back to Nigel.
Okay, thank you, Joanne, and thank you for your weather forecast. Let's move swiftly on. This one is an interesting one because it's been around for a while and actually doesn't just cover the Christmas party, but I do think it's always worth reiterating this because we've run this slide for this presentation in some sort of form for a few years now, and we change it each time. But I'm going to focus in on the key points relating to this particular act. What I'm going to do while I start to introduce it is if people want to tell me if they have a Bribery Act policy in place within their working environment. I know the last company I worked at did, and some do, some don't, so I'd just be interested on a straw poll, and Liz will collect that data for me as I carry on talking. So I'm going to read a little bit from the act, and I promise this isn't going to be a really dry legal slide, but I am just going to read this particular bit for you. Bribery is defined as giving someone a financial or other advantage to encourage that person to perform their functions or activities improperly, or to reward that person for having already done so. So if you sort of digest all the bits to that, it's basically getting somebody to do something that they shouldn't, in a nutshell, in my Yorkshire straight speak here. And believe it or not, there are two types of offence. One is giving a bribe, which is called active bribery, and the other one is agreeing, not necessarily receiving it, but agreeing to receive a bribe, which is called passive bribery, surprisingly. And this splits itself into three ways, and there's one which I'm going to focus in on for us today, because obviously I could spend probably a full webinar on this subject. The types of bribery that we've got are bribing another person. So basically, I'll take Joanne out to lunch and she'll give me some extra training work. Don't think that's bribery quite, but she won't do it anyway. Bribery of a public official. This can be interesting because it could be any public official. So those of you who deal with export markets particularly construction or third world countries, have a think about it, because often that's the only way you get things done in those countries, but yet it does get caught by this act which has been around for a few years now. And finally, the one which is the one that I'm going to talk about today is failure of a commercial organisation to prevent it. And that actually covers everybody, including the Business Springboard, including Shorebird. It's not just people who are in the public light. And if we don't get this right, and don't please sort of think I'm trying to take the shine off Christmas, but there is a risk of imprisonment or an unlimited fine. So it's important that we have something in place. And the legislation, as with a lot of legislation, doesn't tell us what we've got to do. It tells us that we've got to apply judgment to it. And there are 6 tests that we need to apply judgment to, which I'm going to briefly run through and give you some hints and tips and some practicality around it before we move to the end of the presentation. So, needless to say, the first one is proportionality. What you do and how you set yourself up should be proportional to the risks. So I would have some sort of documented risk assessment to how likely the organisation is to bribery. Next one is the one that we always ask for, is top-level commitment. So do you have a policy statement from the chief exec? Does the chief exec and the board review risks around this regularly? Is the training which is sponsored by the board, and are they seen to be believing this legislation? Next thing is risk assessment. So it's looking at your own organisation, and as I mentioned before, what markets do you deal with? If you deal with third world countries, then I think there's a pretty high risk that bribery is going to happen. If you supply to smaller UK businesses, then probably not. So there's a whole guide, and Liz is going to pop the introduction to the Bribery Act, a link to it on the LinkedIn page as well at the end of the session, because I haven't got the time to go through it in any detail. Ongoing due diligence, so it's regularly updating what you do and understanding your market and understanding what your customers and suppliers are. Making sure that you communicate this regularly to your staff, and finally, having an ongoing monitoring process. Interesting point with this is it could be a director, it could be an employee, or it could be an agent who is subject to this. So basically, you need a framework in place that covers those three groups of people, and then if you are in a position where something has hit you, then you're in a position where you can, if you had to go to court, you could defend it. Anyway, the good news is that the information that you're going to get at the end of the webinar also says that hospitality is not necessarily a problem. So if you do get suppliers that take you out, you know, if they're just taking you out as a big group, as a customer group, then I don't think there's anything to worry about. I think if one of our suppliers organises us to have a jet aircraft take us to the south of France for a meal out or something like that, I think it would probably start raising some questions. So if people do receive gifts or corporate hospitality, you might want to have some sort of declaration process that's looked at by a compliance officer. That's what we used to do in our organisation. Little intranet form saying, I've got a case of wine, and then you can actually demonstrate that you're applying the Act. Anyway, that is all that I'm going to talk. I could go on forever about this, but that's all I'm going to say today, because we're running up to 40 minutes on the webinar already, and I'm sure Joanne has got something to wrap up with the webinar for us.
Thank you, Nigel. And incidentally, I'm going to set a big hunt to find that supplier who's taken us to the south of France in the private jet, but we haven't got one of those at the moment. I hope you found the contents of that interesting. I think especially on the Bribery Act, it is around the time where we often receive gifts, and we just have to be careful to protect the organisation and put some practical things in there about disclosing them and make sure we're not at risk. So I've sincerely enjoyed delivering that. I love the Christmas time. Just if you did want to know more about the Business Springboard, our web address is on there, and we do deliver management leadership training in a wide variety of areas. We also have a schedule of pop-up courses. These are our ones in West Yorkshire, but we do run them around the rest of the country too. So some dates and times coming up to give you an idea of the types of programs that we do deliver in a masterclass schedule of half-day bite-sized chunks. So anybody wants any more information, that myself and Nigel will be happy to supply it. So that just leaves us at the end. If anybody does have any questions that they wish to post on there, do use the chat box, and we'll take any of them as we go through. Okay, Karen, let me just look at that one. Discuss it in family account against the one. I'll pass it over to Nigel to answer.
Right, you need to read it out. I can't see that.
Does the cost of entertaining a family member count against the 150 per head of the employee?
It's £150 per head, so it's £300 if there are two of them.
Is that for family member too?
I think it's one partner is how I would view it. Yeah. So if you take a whole family out, then obviously if you've got two partners that are employees, then they could bring a partner each, so you get four. Or if you've got one person who's an employee, they'd only get one partner.
£300.
Yeah, for both. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. And as time is moving on, I will pass over to Liz. But before I go, just wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much, Joanne and Nigel. There's lots of information there, lots of useful ideas and things to think about, certainly that's come out of that webinar, so thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. And just to let you know, next week we are defending claims in the Employment Tribunal with Marie Walsh, and that's on the 26th of November. That's next Wednesday at the usual time of 1 o'clock. And by all means, connect with us on social media, via our website, or send us an email. Tell us what you thought. Any ideas insofar as future webinars for next year, always appreciated. And I do hope to see you again soon. And again, I won't wish you Merry Christmas yet because it seems too far away from me. I've got about 4 or 5 more webinars to deliver. So in the meantime, have a good afternoon and look forward to seeing you again. So thank you very much, everybody.